The Princess Bride is a cult classic. Most people, including me, discovered it as a movie, but William Goldman originally intended for it to just be a novel when he wrote it in 1973 for his two daughters. His daughters asked for him to create a story that involved a princess and a bride. Instead, he decided to mesh the two into The Princess Bride, which we all know and love. The film was not a smashing success, but both the cast, the crew, and the audience who originally watched it loved the movie. And Cary Elwes, who played Wesley, said that he thinks it's because the movie has an incredible life from generation to generation. I guess it's because it's so sweet and has a really good heart. Princess Bride is not a serious movie, and you would know this if you've seen it. And judging by the title, if you haven't seen it, you would probably also guess it's not the most serious thing. It's really predictable, old, silly, and charming. Kind of like my own comfort film. I watch it probably like once a month. It has a really cheesy, cliche love plot, but there's just something so beautiful about it. Other people also agree. I dove into Reddit to figure out why people liked The Princess Bride, and one of the most frequent answers that I found is the goodness of The Princess Bride. And you might be wondering, what exactly is that? And the answer is, it's everything. It has to do with the storytelling, the script, the characters, the casting. Everything was so simple. In today's Hollywood, when there are a bunch of convoluted movies that require analysis, it's really nice to just have a movie that's extremely straightforward. I think that one of the issues with movies today is that there is a lack of just fun movies. Again, I like dissecting the occasional complex storyline. Sometimes I get really deep into that. But I think that it's important to find enjoyment in the media that you consume, and that's what The Princess Bride is. It's the extreme balance on the other side of the scale. It's fun, easy, simple, and wholesome. And of course, in The Princess Bride, there's conflict because there should always be conflict in your movie. That's what kind of let the story move along. But it's not world-ending in the case of The Princess Bride. It's very individualistic and person-to-person, rather than anything that's like stopping nuclear war or keeping a meteor from hitting Earth. It's not huge. It's not catastrophic, but it feels catastrophic. We grow to care about almost all the characters. There's not a single irredeemable character in the entire film except for Mr. Six Fingers, and also the rodents of unusual size, but even then I feel like, we can give some leeway. But viewers will sit down to enjoy The Princess Bride and to ultimately get lost in the pastoral setting where everything kind of just feels easier. In the modern day, everything is difficult and super intricate for absolutely no reason. Tell me why taxes have to be like that.
It's never too early to learn that the government is a greedy piglet that suckles on a taxpayer's teat.
But Wesley and Buttercup don't have to deal with taxes or student loans or crippling debt because love is all that matters. All of this to say, my entire college experience has come full circle by me creating this video essay. And I also want to let you know that in this video essay, we are going to be talking about Twilight in relation to, other things, but ultimately this video essay is about Twilight. This is also going to be my preface. I want to tell you about the sources that I'm using. If you couldn't already tell, this video essay is going to be about the ancient world, and there's some nuance that comes with that. When I sat down with the professors in my department,
I said, I want to make history. And that's what this is.
For critique, they looked at a few parts of my 50-page script. They said that I was using both Greek and Roman sources, and that can get confusing. And I want to be a credible person for you because this is an academic video essay ultimately in place of my senior research. So I'm using sources from both ancient Greek and Roman authors and poets. And it's not to say that all of these different mediums are the exact same in both cultures. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying that the two did merge at some point. Ethnicity and nationality blended together. And Rebecca Kennedy writes about this in her book, Ancient Identities, that the idea of a pure ethnicity called Greeks in antiquity is a purely modern fiction. For the Romans, grant citizenship to some conquered people from their provinces and to all those freed from enslavement in the Roman Empire. This meant that people and their descendants from all over Europe, Asia, and Africa, if they were enslaved and brought into the Roman Empire, them and their descendants, when freed, would ultimately become Roman. Ancient identities in the Greco-Roman world were very fluid. They could mix and match in whatever way they wanted, and so I think that using both Greek and Roman sources is totally acceptable just because the cultures merged so much. And also the Romans took a lot from the Greeks. Now, onto the video essay. What does it mean to suffer? Because I want to talk about suffering in conjunction with The Princess Bride. But yeah, spoilers for this nearly 40-year-old movie. So Buttercup and Wesley are the two main characters in the film, and they kind of grew up on a farm together. We don't really know their parents or anything, but we do know that they live together. Buttercup is kind of a little position above him because she's always telling him what to do. Girl's living my dream. Wesley wants to go out and make a better life for the two of them, and so he goes. The news returns to Buttercup that he was captured by the dread pirate Roberts. He doesn't take prisoners, and so she automatically assumes that he's dead, rightfully so. Let's be nice on my queen. And so Buttercup somehow gets engaged to Prince Humperdinck. I don't know why he chose Buttercup out of all of them, but in his speech he's like, "She was once like you, but you will not find her so common now." In that exact tone.
You will not find her common now.
People from Sicily or some other place want to start a war. They kidnap Buttercup. And Prince Humperdinck also wants to start a war. So he just lets it happen. So she's kidnapped by pirates, and Wesley comes along and saves her. They go through the fire swamp. They're separated again. Wesley is brought to the pit of despair and is tortured by this weird water machine that apparently takes life if you just move the dial up.
Don't even think about trying to escape.
Buttercup is about to get married to Prince Humperdinck. Wesley finds her. They fight Prince Humperdinck to the pain.
No! To the pain.
I don't think I'm quite familiar with that phrase.
And then they jump out of a window. They're riding a horse together. True love's kiss. And that is happily ever after. The two are separated for nearly the whole movie. They're not together very much. Ultimately, the plot is long and torturous as we, the viewers, kind of just want Wesley and Buttercup to be together again. And so we suffer through the back and forth at the same time as they do. And in many modern romances, physical separation is seen as an important plot point and necessary to add tension and anxious anticipation for the eventual reunification of the lovers. And they will eventually reunite. That is always something that has to happen. Similarly, in Twilight New Moon, Edward makes a very difficult decision to leave Bella in Forks while he and his family go on vacation to Rio in Brazil, since he's afraid that he will end up killing her since her blood smells delicious to him. And in the first movie, he says it himself,
"I've never wanted a human's blood so much in my life. You're like my own personal brand of heroin."
Edward is addicted to Bella, but he also harbors enough self-control to not bite into her neck and drown her of all of that delicious smelling blood. After reading the first book, I can say with 100% certainty that his behavior honestly gives me whiplash. Even in conversations, he will switch his tone so quick for Bella, and it really did piss me off because I was like, make a decision. I did read Twilight, the first book, and then New Moon for this video essay. I have not read the other ones. This is where I'm at right now. I'm taking a break. You would understand you need a brain break when you're reading all these books. He's kind of constantly at war with the two sides of himself, and this is very clear. One side is reasoning that Bella would be safer without a connection to him at all, and the other side is kind of addicted to her presence. After Edward leaves, we know that Bella sits in her depression chair for months on end. In the actual book, as you flip, every single page has the name of a month, and months go by when she is just sad. Even Charlie is really freaked out. She wakes up screaming because of her night terrors and isolates herself from her friends until Jacob, Wolf Boy. We also know that all Edward does is worry about Bella because whenever she threatens to do something danger prone, he appears to her in a misty form just to remind her not to be reckless. In the book, he's kind of just a person who talks in her head. It's just a voice. But yeah, both Edward and Bella are suffering from each other's physical absence. The presence of Edward in Bella's head kind of makes it bearable. So this kind of begs the question for me as to why suffering is necessary. It really creates drama, and audiences love drama. You need drama for movies, and you need drama for the storyline to matter and for there to be stake. We don't want it to be easy. We want some kind of obstacle and conflict that makes the lovers' uniting moment all the more satisfying. The appeal of Twilight New Moon is this separation. We see Bella grow closer to Jacob Black, and he seems like a healthy alternative to Edward. It's easy with him. He says it himself. He's like, it would be easier with me.
I'm exactly right for you, Bella. It would be as easy as breathing with me.
Yeah, Jacob Black has clear romantic feelings for Bella. He's like 2 years younger than her. I think she's like 17 and he's like 15. Apparently he's also ripped as a 15-year-old, so I don't know how realistic that is. But the movie gives Jacob a chance because when Edward's there, she doesn't give a romantic relationship with Jacob a second thought. He's kind of just the one that she settles for, while Edward's absence provides room for conflict in the form of a love rival that is Jacob Black. The movie follows a long-suffering love plotline that has been commonly present in dramas, particularly in relation to slow burn. This slow burn of a romantic storyline didn't come out of nowhere. I firmly believe that it gained its general foothold in antiquity. So the separation of Wesley and Buttercup is the same as that of Edward and Bella. It's physical. When two people are separated, they cannot see each other, they can't hold each other, they can't touch each other. And so this makes looking and seeing, and particularly the gaze, the ability to gaze at your lover, a very important part in romances. This is crucial, not only for romance dramas today, but also in antiquity. Ancient novels will follow the same pattern. The ability of the gaze to create love and also to inflame intimacy. Heliodorus of Emesa, an ancient Greek author, wrote one of the early ancient novels that we still use to characterize romance stories today, which you might have heard of it, you might have not. It's called the Aethiopica. It centers two young lovers, Chariclea and Theogenes, who happen to meet at a Pythian celebration in Delphi. Chariclea is a beautiful and well-known priestess of Artemis, while Theogenes is a noble Thessalian hero, travels to the temple as a part of his sacred delegation. Artemis being the virgin goddess in this case is very important because it creates a natural boundary of Chariclea's oath to remain a virgin until marriage. The way that they meet is they kind of just lock eyes while exchanging a torch, which is, symbolic. They're carrying the flame. We carry the flame and they pass the flame along to one another. And so they instantly fall in love with one another. It is like ordained by Eros himself. It is an instinctual, almost primal reaction. It's their first meeting where we see the renowned trope and romantic ideal of love at first sight, which is another very prevalent thing in a lot of dramas and romance movies and novels. Callisteris, the story's narrator, describes the moment it happened. He says, "For at the moment they set eyes on each other, the young pair fell in love, as if the soul recognized its kin at the very first encounter and sped to meet that which was worthily its own." Nobody does it like Heliodorus, right? Unless talking about Hosier. Hosier is another contender. The exchange of the torch is a symbolic representation of a burning passion that they both feel in that moment. In the space of looking, only the two lovers exist and the rest of the world kind of just seems to blur and disappear around them. A similar feeling is ignited in another Greek novel by Achilles Tatius of Alexandria, Leucippa and Cleitophon. Cleitophon, you tell me. This novel is one of his only surviving works and was written in kind of the Roma era between 200 and 300 AD. Book 1 begins with a young man named Cleitophon who instantly lays eyes on Leucippa. He describes her as a picturesque beauty, comparable to the painted portrait of Europa on a bull. If I can find that portrait, I'll put it here. If I can't find it, then just imagine very beautiful woman on top of a bull. Directly I saw her, I was lost, for beauty wounds deeper than any arrow and strokes down through the eyes into the soul. The eye is the passage for love's wound. Try as I would to drag my eyes away from gazing upon her, they would not obey me, and remained fixed upon her face by the force of her beauty, and at length they won the day against my will. Contrasting against the meeting of Theogenes and Chariclea as something very reciprocal between the two, Cleitophon's gaze upon Leucippa is a little bit predatory because it's not reciprocated. It is something that only he feels at that moment. We don't see any kind of reciprocation from her. He admits that he devoured the maiden with his eyes, sometimes intercepting a glance on her part, for that was his dinner. He continues to write, "The others had taken their pleasure by the satisfying of their appetite, but all my feast was through my eyes, so that I retired to rest, gorged with the vision of the maiden's face, and sated with undiluted gazing upon her. Indeed, I was drunk with love." First mention of being drunk, guys. We'll see how many times we can get it. Leucippa does not reciprocate his interest or intentions, and this can hardly be called a first meeting, as I said. Rather, Cleitophon desires Leucippa and proceeds to dream about her and fantasize that he had touched her. and he talked to her and had very close interactions in the passages following his first sight of her. So we see through the ancient novel that presence and the gaze are both very critical aspects to the beginning and continuation of love. And both of these must be reciprocal, or else it is not love. Cleitophon staring at Leucippe without any notes from her is not romantic, it's creepy. Desire for another can only be justified with reciprocal love. This is clearly being filmed on a different day. I am different. Everything is different. I have wine. Put the wine up here. In fact, there are 2 wine. Anyway, remember the wine is here. I'm actually going to take a wine so that I can just hold it up every once in a while and be like, yes, remember. In Lauren Berlant's 2012 book, Desire/Love, Berlant psychoanalyzes desire in the Freudian sense. She insists that love is a tool to justify desire towards others. This is already kind of separating love and desire as 2 separate concepts, while one is used for the other. Desire is aggressive and heated, but it is integral to the eventual reciprocation of feelings, something between consensual and something not. Consensual aggression of desire is no longer just desire, but love. And the consensual bit is very important. But love, as desire, is memorable only when it reaches towards something to which it can attach itself. The lover, Berlant writes, hungers to have her object right where she can love it. Berlant concludes that not only is reciprocation of desire necessary for love, but the physical closeness is equally crucial. Why? Let's consider long-distance relationships, right? Long-distance relationships are 2 people that supposedly like each other. They say, hey, maybe we can go without being physically near each other, but it's usually really hard. We as humans like touch, and we like being with the people that we like. Desiring by itself is inherently hostile and aggressive, as we see with Cleitophon. But reciprocal desire is accepted and normalized, which is one of the things that we see with love at first sight when there's like an exchange. And although desire without eventual love can be perverted, masochistic, or even sadistic, desire with love is acceptable, as it enables the pressure of desire's aggression to be discharged within a frame of propriety. For this reason, loving permits aggression, while desire alone does not. And that reciprocation is the main distinction between love and desire. Similarly to Berlant, Irving Goffman has also given commentary on the human instinct to perform in social interaction. We want to present ourselves as normal people who do normal things and have normal hobbies, and so we put on a performance that conforms to the more standard version of ourselves. As humans, we are always under observation, and so we establish a front for ourselves to show to others. Who we are when we're alone very well might be our real personality, but the knowledge of others looking at us forces us to act in a particular way in which we will not be seen as deviant, and this creates a shell of constant performance. That desire to perform is an abject disturbance to how we might usually act if we were around people we were more comfortable with or by ourselves. And while other settings of deviancy are viewed negatively, love is encouraged and felt despite being a somewhat deviant feeling. It's almost an inevitable affliction. John J. Winkler writes in his 1994 Invention of Romance about common themes in ancient novels, particularly about the love and marriage plotline. Winkler describes the events of falling in love as something that only happens once in a person's life, and that this event has to lead to marriage, and particularly in relation to the ancient novel. It was kind of inevitable. The 2 lovers are quite young and untouched as yet by any worldly passion. In fact, they will never feel any eros, any erotic passion, but this one for each other. And it will survive incredible trials and temptations until they are at last properly married in Ethiopia. This trope is mentioned particularly in relation to Heliodorus' Ethiopia, but can be applied to almost any other ancient novel in which the 2 lovers get married. Diogenes and Chariclea are in love with each other, but they just need to surpass every single obstacle that is put in their way in order to get married before consummation. Because Chariclea is a priestess of Artemis, she values her virginity, she values her chastity, a very powerful and valuable part of her oath. And despite the 2's erotic feelings for each other, this acts as a barrier for them to show valiant self-control until marriage. But the oath of chastity is only one of the obstacles. Others can be related to social status, maybe thinking that your lover was dead when they weren't, Shout out Princess Bride, and also Twilight, by the way. But at the end of the story, the point is they get married and they live happily ever after. And also we rarely see that happily ever after, by the way. It's usually they just get married and the story ends there. And that happens with a lot of modern dramas as well. Another ancient example is in Longus's Daphnis and Chloe. I translated this for one of my classes, by the way. It was super fun. Longus was thought to have lived on Lesbos and was alive at a time similar to Heliodorus. Daphnis and Chloe is probably one of his most notable works and probably the most similar to the Princess Bride in setting. The setting being the countryside, which is very pastoral and idyllic. They are naive and they're innocent because they are away from the city, in which things are often thought to be corrupt, and corrupt that innocence. The main barrier to their marriage is their class status, though, which is resolved at the end of the novel. When I say class status, I mean that Chloe is adopted into a family that is freeborn, while Daphnis is adopted into a family that are enslaved. And so this is mainly their main barrier. And all of these obstacles to closeness and their happily ever afters are eliminated at the end of the novel. And that's when they can get married and consummate the marriage. So kind of going back to Winkler's love and marriage plotline, one might wonder why it has to be that way and what it might look like if we kind of like flipped it around and we went marriage to love. We do have a source for this in Herodotus's The Histories from the 5th century BCE. Herodotus was one of the world's first anthropologists, is how I like to put it. We actually did read him in one of my anthropology classes when he was talking about his travels to Egypt. He wrote a story called Candaules and Gyges, in which Candaules, the king of Lydia, had long been married to his wife in an arranged marriage. The marriage was without love until it wasn't, when Candaules fell in love with his wife, and this was a tragedy because he tells Gyges, his bodyguard, that because his wife is the most beautiful, Gyges needs to come over and see it for himself. And so Gyges originally is like, no, I don't know if that's appropriate. But Candaules is like, no, my wife is the most beautiful. You do need to come see her. And so Gyges is like, fine, whatever. I'll come see your hot wife in her bedroom when she doesn't know I'm there. She does find out. He comes in, sees her naked, and she's like, okay, you have two options. Option A here is that you can kill my husband and become king in his stead, or you die here. And he's like, well, I don't like option 2, so I will choose option 1. So he kills Candaules, the king of Lydia, and thus takes his place and also steals his wife. So this tale appears to give caution to love in marriage, claiming that marriage by itself is fine, but adding in feelings can be very unpredictable. But I think this story could be interpreted differently, which is what I was talking about. If love comes first and then marriage comes second, then could the issue in Herodotus' story, Candaules and Gyges, be the order in which things occurred? And I think it is. There's another question that can be asked of whether Candaules, if he actually loves his wife as he claims he does, or if he just desires her. The reason that I ask this question is because he equates her beauty with her nakedness, and that's very physical. Usually love is something that comes with not only the physical, but also the personality and everything on the inside. He was like, Gyges, you don't understand. You have to come see my hot wife. But yeah, this is a very big violation of her privacy. And it's very aggressive, and it doesn't feel affectionate or soft. It feels hostile and hard. And typically this idea of arranged marriage seen with Candaules and his wife is left to the elite, while the common people can choose. They have more leeway to explore and discover. I'm reminding you, the wine is still here. Common people are not held to tragic expectations that are found in political families. However, the fact that Candaules and his wife are married does change things, because today marriage is often between two people that love each other and want to make that commitment to spend the rest of their lives together. And divorce often happens when that love leaves. But in antiquity, arranged marriages were more common for status and class purposes. So while for us, marriage is an act of reciprocation of feelings, in antiquity, this is different, and it's more reciprocation of intent. So say that I'm Titia, and my family wants me to marry Titius because he owns a fantastic brewery or something, and it's like, we need to do business with this guy. You're gonna go create this connection. It's like in a bunch of like those period dramas where it's like, as long as the two parties can come to an arrangement or an agreement, there are no issues in the marriage. But bringing this back to the Princess Bride, because of course I will, we can see that in Buttercup's story, marriage without love almost killed her. Had she been forced to go through with it and Wesley was not there to save her, she would have ended it herself, which she does tell Prince Humperdinck, like, know that if he does not come for me, I will be dead by morning. she says that. And rather than love as a threat, we see the true meaning behind the actual movie, that true love will always win despite all obstacles, and the ancient novel, I believe, set the stage for this theme. This emphasis on true love that can only exist between two specific people and no others is seen in the ideal chaste couples in these ancient novels. All the ancient novel cares about is who the lovers marry, because it has to be each other. Similarly, when Buttercup learns that Wesley is dead, she shuts down, locks herself in her room, sits in her depression chair, and refuses to eat or sleep. She woefully decrees that she will never love again.
I will never love again.
Humperdinck would have never been an option, even if he had affection for Buttercup, just because of the element in the genre, that if two people love each other, they are going to end up together.
Hear this now. I will always come for you.
But how can you be sure?
This is true love.
But because there is true love between the two main characters, there are always the directly and indirectly rejected individuals that are like casualties of that, who also desired the main characters that failed the first step of desire. They failed at the first step of desire. I think that if someone ever told me that, I'd be gone. As I said before, being in love is an abject disturbance to our performance. We see ourselves behaving in different ways that aren't quite characteristic to us, and this proves true for heartbreak as well.
What's happening to me? I'm leaking!
Papa, you're crying.
I'm leaking salt water.
Horace, a Roman poet, keep in mind the wine. Horace, a Roman poet, wrote about his personal affliction with love as if it was a disease, describing how noticeable it was to the point that others gossiped about it. He writes, I'd often complained to you in tears. Once the shameless god had warmed me violently with the wine that discovered where my secrets were hidden. The wine. Horace describes his personal account of heartbreak in his epodes and how he drowned himself in alcohol to better curb the pain he felt. And this shameless god that Horace criticizes is Bacchus, god of wine, known in the Greek as Dionysus. Immediately here, we are met with the concept of burning passion that quite literally hurts the one who is affected through ingestion of alcohol. God of wine, which Horace is very familiar with. And this feeling makes us act in ways that are entirely out of line, all because we might feel flustered at feeling these intense emotions and aren't quite sure what to do with them. Trust, I've been drunk before. I'm 22. As Horace references, these feelings are very similar to intoxication. But one symptom of being drunk is the lack of a filter. Wine, therefore, acts as a kind of like lever releases this facade that we put on, go back to Irving Goffman, and kind of reveals the feelings underneath, like it bears our soul to the world. So if we go back to Horace discovering his hidden secrets, that's what I'm talking about. But Horace's feelings and crying also brings the conversation back to reciprocation and non-reciprocation, which leads us back to Lauren Berlin. This time I want to associate different terms with these words. Reciprocation with safe love and non-reciprocation with dangerous love. Love is dangerous if it's not reciprocated because it can cause unpredictable harm to the person as well as the object of their affection. Ovid, the Roman poet, also responsible for the Metamorphoses, not to be confused with Kafka's Metamorphosis or Apuleius's The Metamorphoses, wrote about this exact topic of dangerous and safe love. He called himself love's teacher, as Chiron was Achilles, in The Art of Love, Ars Amatoria, mind you, one of his famous works that details the negative effects of love and how to best protect yourself from them. Ovid claims that he sings of safe love and permissible intrigue, and he suggests that love may cause injury and danger, but if you listen to his tips involving this particular art, it will not be. He does not discourage love entirely, despite acknowledging its danger, instead encouraging it while being notably cautious. In the case that love does become dangerous, don't worry, because he also has a book for that. The destabilization of love can be scary, and it can have really grandiose, world-breaking effects, especially if you're suffering from a heartbreak and still feel love for the one that hurt you. I brought up intoxication and Horace's symptoms of heartbreak. Love was not a danger to him. It simply shifted him from his regular balance. So if Horace were to find himself in a situation where he was being hurt by love, he could simply turn to Ovid's book, Remedia Amoris. Can you guess what that means? It means the cures for love. Remedia, remedy, amoris, amor, love. remedy love. He writes, "What was passion before is now reason. Let him who will die of wretched passion unless he quits it, quit it." Ovid equates passion to drug-induced illness. I don't think he meant to do that. I'm not entirely sure actually if there were addicting drugs in the ancient world, unless we're talking about the fumes that the Delphic Oracle was inhaling. This is an allegation. This is alleged, is what I meant to say. This is alleged. But still, he does write that passionate love can kill and one must quit it if he wants to live. And Ovid draws a blatant distinction between passion and reason. Passion as something that can harm and reason as something that can cure. However, I also think that it's reasonable to suggest that Ovid's suggestion for quitting passion shouldn't only be taken as entirely cutting off one's feelings for their beloved. I don't really think he meant that. He simply says that passionate love is not stable and that the reader must have reached a stable point through reason. Simply incorporate reason into your passion and you'll be fine. This can go one way or the other, the cooling of unreciprocated feelings or the reciprocation of feelings. I suggest this because of how contemporary dating is structured. Part of love that Ovid is warning against is our honeymoon phase. This is when partners date each other with kind of like rose-tinted glasses and only see the best of the other person. They're burning with passion, but all flames must go out or at least dim eventually if they're going to be sustainable. The hotter it burns, the faster it goes out, whatever that saying is. And so reason is used to dim it. So lovers have to enter a phase of long-lasting love or inevitably break the relationship off. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have been mentioning a lot of things in relation to heating and cooling, to both reciprocation and non-reciprocation, which is for a reason. And although Berlin does an amazing job at analyzing Berlin does an amazing job at analyzing the movement from desire to love, I believe that she is missing something, and I think that Peter Toohey kind of fills in that hole. He adds an important distinction between love, lovesickness, and melancholia. And we've talked about love as something reciprocal that allows aggressive desire between people to go without punishment. Lovesickness, however, is a symptom of unconsummated desire, and it's almost like a bad side effect from a drug. Toohey writes that the dominant reaction to frustrated love in ancient literature was manic and frequently violent, and that ancient authors do not differentiate between lovesickness and melancholia. I have a few contentions with this. Although both lovesickness and melancholia are cases where the affection is not reciprocated, there is a slight difference. Galen, a Greek physician, recounts one of his personal cases. He was called in to diagnose a woman with feverish symptoms. These were described physically, such as one's arteries pulsating madly with love, lying awake at night, constantly tossing from one position to another. Either she's an insomniac. He diagnosed this woman with depression caused by an abundance of black bile, melena chole. That's the Greek word, by the way. Of course, black bile is not real, but it was one of the 4 Hippocratic humors, along with yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Phlegm and blood are real. And while an abundance of any of these can lead to behavioral changes, Galen directly correlates the excess of black bile with love. And in relation to that, Horace personally equated love with being drunk and crying, perhaps an unconscious attempt to remove excess liquid from the body in a moment of emotional passion.
What's happening to me? I'm leaking!
In the case of lovesickness, the abundance of black bile runs hot, while with melancholia, it runs cold.
Your hand is so cold.
This equation of temperature makes sense as symptoms of love often involve heat rushing to the face or feeling flustered. And of course there is nuance here, as the ancient Greeks and Romans often wrote about crazy, frenzied women who went on rampages without reciprocation of love. So clearly there has been a change in where I am sitting, but right now I'm in my car because I thought this would be like a really fun thing. So I hope you think this is as fun as I do. So starting from where I left off, and of course there is nuance here, as the ancient Greeks and Romans often wrote about crazy, frenzied women who went on rampages without reciprocation of love. Think Medea, Dido, Deianira. First of all, we have Medea. Medea faces a critical moment where her husband, Jason, abandons her and her children for a younger princess. And Medea loses it, and I, of course, am a fierce defender of Medea. Like, girl did what she had to do, and that's my opinion. And people tend to paint her as the one in the wrong, and I do think that she over-exaggerated by her children and then riding off into the sunset with like a sun chariot on snakes. Dido, queen of Carthage, was struck by Eros's arrow. She had no choice in this matter, but she found herself drowning in love with Aeneas, who was the hero of Troy, in the Aeneid. And Aeneas abandons her at her castle, leaving her betrayed, heartbroken, and just a little bit crazy, completely ready to jump off the nearest ledge. She calls upon the Furies to rain revenge and curses upon Aeneas, destroy him utterly. There's actually a word for that in Greek. I'm going to figure out what it is and put it here, because I love this word. It's my favorite. After she calls upon the Furies to like curse Aeneas, she does the unalivement. And last but not least, we have Deianira, who is Heracles' wife. She just wanted her husband to love her more, and so she used a love potion given to her by Nessus, this random guy who wanted Heracles dead. You might recall this also from the Disney version of Hercules. Heracles is the Greek. Do you remember like the blue guy, Nessus, that like originally was holding like Megara? That's the guy. He just wanted Heracles dead, and with the love potion, she unintentionally Heracles and herself. And so this frenzied woman trope is usually associated with some kind of ability to do magic or curses, and so we don't see that as much today because that's fiction. The closest thing that we do have to this stereotype is the crazy ex-girlfriend trope, and it's not to the point of like, well, it can be, but most of the time it's not to the point of children or laying genuine harmful curses with the power of the Furies on a non-interested party. In real life, it's a lot rarer to see a crazy ex-girlfriend that harms an ex rather than the crazy ex-boyfriend that assaults their ex. While the crazy ex-girlfriend trope is more common within fictional stories, we see the crazy ex-boyfriend in an outstanding amount among true crime and real historical figures. And fictional media tends to characterize the crazy ex as just that, crazy. They're frenzied, deceptive, devious, reckless, bloodthirsty, and physically destructive, and they want to either have the ex all to herself or successfully ruin his life. One thing that is lacking in the stories are often the context that is surrounding this, and that's what I brought up before with Medea. Jason was the one who acted up and made her do that. So like in the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the main female character undergoes a very large mental health crisis that impacts and uproots her entire life, and it causes her to act in this crazy way when it's really just a woman experiencing mental health and dealing with depression, anxiety, and the desire to unalive herself, while dealing with the abandonment from not only her ex, but also her father. Yeah, we see a woman like Medea, just like in The Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, that does act out in a very destructive manner. However, there is a reason for her behavior, and I don't think that we can just discount that. Medea is jealous, scorned, distressed, and deeply upset because Jason leaves her to be with a younger woman, and her just causes for rage are overshadowed by her extreme reaction. It is a drastic switch from reciprocal desire to non-reciprocal. It leads to an aggressive push for violence by her psyche. Desire and lovesickness as aggression and causes for violence are especially common in the ancient novel, but this has been talked about ad nauseum, and we've heard all of this before. Lovesickness and heated black bile is fun and all, but I don't want to skip over the cold melancholia that Tui also mentioned. My entire purpose to creating this video essay was to talk about something stigmatized. Yearning. Yearning and desire are not interchangeable. We're meant to keep it all inside and almost act ashamed at feeling our wants and needs for another human being. At least that's the expectation that we have set today. It's a shameful thing to have a crush. We're embarrassed. Comparably, if we go back to The Princess Bride, there is absolutely no stigma surrounding Buttercup, who sits in her depression chair and says, "I will never love again," when her lovely farm boy is declared dead by the Dread Pirate Roberts.
I will never love again.
There is also no stigma when Bella stares out a window for months on end after Edward leaves her behind for Rio. But people do clown on her, and I understand that, because, you know, they did only like really know each other for like a year. Was it even a year? It's kind of hard to say. The overall timeline for Twilight is a little bit complicated. I won't get into that right now, but the point is people clown on her for that. And it's a really big double standard. But this sense of shaming and cringe is also gendered. Women tell other women to stand up when they're longing for a man, insinuating that by yearning for a man, they're putting themselves beneath him. It's really a thing of hierarchy. And It's a thing of power. Men will tell other men that simping is cringe. I know that's like awful language to use. It's not very academic, but let me get there. When they find another woman attractive and maybe want to pursue something, whether it's a relationship or some kind of like intimate situationship, I don't know. But gendered language keeps men and women in check, and they stigmatize longing. Although wanting and longing for another person is more stigmatized today, that was not the case in a lot of these ancient novels and works. I'm definitely getting ahead of myself though, because the word yearning is so overused to describe any male lead in a modern movie or book that seems to pursue the female lead, and it's usually out of pure desperation to have their feelings reciprocated. In these instances, the man takes on a more feminine role, placing himself submissively at the woman's feet and kneeling and begging in desperate hope that she will reciprocate his feelings. And this gives the woman the power over the man to decide if she does want to pursue something. A man who yearns is a man who earns is a very popular saying in online forums, particularly among women on TikTok. I have since deleted TikTok, but back when I was on TikTok, this was something that I saw whenever I was scrolling, and it was often like about the man just really like craving the woman, and it was very obvious in the quote, and people will be like, oh my god, I love this. The saying suggests that if a man chases after a woman the way that a woman might yearn for a man, he will eventually succeed in his affections. And often it is women who are quieter and more passive in their affections than men, who are usually characterized as being more outrageous and aggressive with their feelings, very, very forward. I know this isn't true. Men don't do this anymore. Another idea that has been making their rounds in online forums is that if a man likes a woman enough, he will pursue her. In fact, he will do anything for her. If he wants to, he will. Men are therefore kind of considered the active character, and women are considered the passive in this dynamic. Why do women all of a sudden want a yearning man? And what do they even really mean by this? I think Sappho, the ancient Greek poet, puts it best. She writes, y'all get ready for this. He seems as fortunate as the gods to me. The man who sits opposite you and listens nearby to your sweet voice and lovely laughter. Truly, that sets my heart trembling in my breast. For when I look at you for a moment, then it is no longer possible for me to speak. My tongue has snapped. At once a subtle fire has stolen beneath my flesh. I see nothing with my eyes. My ears hum. I am greener than grass, and it seems to me that I am little short of dying. This fragment is poetic, as Sappho catalogs the symptoms of longing while she watches in apparent despair as her beloved converses with a man. Fair response, by the way. The scene is both voyeuristic and masochistic in nature. She watches with envy, undergoing internal suffering and silence through a burning heat without interference. The unrequited love is quiet and non-destructive, causing no direct harm, but unrequited love usually dangerous with both men and women. This, to me, is the key difference between desire, yearning, and love. Desire as a symptom of love sickness is inherently hostile as an active pursuit. It is aggressive, non-reciprocal, and can lead to violence or eventual love. It's a semi-initial stage in which someone starts to figure out that they feel attracted to someone and figuring out how they want to pursue that attraction. I believe that a fantastic example of desire is showcased in Daphnis and Chloe, and although Chloe and Daphnis can only match each other, there are some love rivals, such as Dorcon, who is the cowherd. Dorcon. When we were reading Daphnis and Chloe in class, I would always say Dorcon, like D-O-R-K. Dorcon, but it's not spelled like that, but it's, you know. Dorcon is a cowherd, and he desires Chloe. And he is not a true love rival because he has no chance. We can use him as a foil against Daphnis, who is Chloe's true love. They are fated to be together. At some point after his other advances were naively rejected, he dresses up as a wolf and he hides in the bushes of the sacred grove that Daphnis and Chloe both share, with the intent of hurting, assaulting Chloe. The plan fails, and eventually Dorcon does die in a field. It's very dramatic. But before he does die, he convinces Chloe to kiss him, and she does before he passes away. And, you know, she doesn't know what it means. Maybe she does. I don't know. I'm not here to rat on my girl. Dorcon is an awful guy. And while Dorcon went the aggressive pursuing route, Daphnis' feelings inevitably led to love. So despite both Daphnis and Dorcon feeling aggressive desire for Chloe, only one had their feelings reciprocated, allowing for that hostility ability to be regulated properly. Yearning is the space covering the spectrum between desire and love. The word itself carries a particular connotation, something sad and passive, a non-reciprocal state of being where someone just wants. They just want. And desire and love are often very dramatic with very clear physical approaches, while yearning is a lot more private and more of a tuned down affliction. It's quiet and less concerned with reciprocation, or at least not as adamant as dramatic desire is. My professor, who is working with me to create this video essay, as in he helped me edit the script, recommended to me that I subscribe to a particular blog by an author that goes by the pen name Velvet Noise. Maha, I think that's how you say it, M-A-J-A. She calls herself. She has a different approach to yearning. She writes in a blog post titled In Defense of Yearning about yearning as an act of resistance in the contemporary age. She writes, "It's strange that yearning, one of the most basic forces of being human, has become countercultural. That to want openly is now seen as naive, inefficient, or embarrassing." Maha describes yearning openly as socially stigmatized, and in this case she brings up simping, which is where I got my other comment, as a form of yearning which is considered cringe. Horace, Ovid, Berlant, Heliodorus, and Herodotus, they all write about being in love, experiencing desire, experiencing just the feeling of inevitable pain that comes with or without it. And out of everyone's description of love, Horace is the most realistic and relatable. In case you don't remember Horace, our friend, he is the one who drank a lot and he cried, and people gossiped about him because it was so annoying and it was so obvious that he was heartbroken. It's really hard to find a romance movie that doesn't end in reciprocation, which non-reciprocation is probably the most realistic it could get. Like, I asked my friends one day in a group chat while I was like writing this section, I was like, can you think of a romance movie where the boy doesn't get the girl doesn't get the boy? And they couldn't. If you can, sick. Either way, there's always reciprocation. That's what I was getting at. People criticize the quietness of it all, that loving and being loved has to be loud and dramatic. In ancient novels, women grieve their love by openly ripping at their shirts, hair, and body as if they're mourning something or someone that has died. Bella and Buttercup have lost their lovers, so it's natural that they are passively depressed in their rooms. They don't get violent, unlike women in ancient novels, and I would like to explore this dichotomy and the distinct differences between yearning in the ancient sense and yearning in the contemporary. Let the record show I am exhausted. I am filming this the day after I get back from spring break. The best way to break a bad habit is through substitution. The same can be said for yearning and desire. If we lack closeness or intimacy to the object of our desire, it's better and easier to find a healthy substitution instead of falling into the seductive temptation of destruction. People can satisfy their desires for the unattainable through imagination and fantasy. Although separation in the modern sense is necessary for desire and fantasy, the same cannot be said for the lives of real people in ancient Greece. Let's draw our focus to ancient marriage to better analyze the separation of feelings, duty, and sexual intimacy within partnerships. Stephenie Kuntz writes in her 2005 book, Marriage, A History, about the origins of marriage and the purpose of its invention. She writes, "I came to reject two widespread, though diametrically opposed, theories about how marriage came into existence among our Stone Age ancestors. The idea that marriage was invented so men could protect women, and the opposing idea that it was invented so men could exploit women. Instead, marriage spoke to the needs of the larger group. It converted strangers into relatives and extended cooperative relations beyond the immediate family or small band by creating far-flung networks of in-laws." The theory of exploitation is a more modern one that is often talked about in women-dominated spaces of the internet. And when I say this, I mean marriage as an institution that is meant to make the woman a wife and thus subservient to the man with difficulty of divorce. These women believe it's better to not marry at all if it's going to end in divorce anyway. But ancient marriages had less to do with love and more of a sense of duty, with the production of legitimate children between two people from property classes. Proprietied? I don't know. Coutts explains that when Greek husbands memorialized their late wives, they didn't talk about mutual love or personal qualities. Instead, they talked about the self-control that she practiced. The ancient populace expected both married and unmarried women to display a certain amount of self-control, or as we know it, sophrosune, through chastity. Producing children was the wife's main domestic duty, and if she was unable to produce a child, this was often grounds enough for the man to divorce her. While wives were subjected to these gendered expectations, the same cannot be said for men. Husbands could seek out Greek heterae, which were ancient prostitutes that could be young men or women, and they would seek them out for the opposite of what they have their wife for pleasure and all things intimacy. Despite the normalcy of men having frequent outside of marriage, it was unthinkable for women to do the same. Lucretius, a Roman poet and philosopher from the 1st century CE, in his De Rerum Natura, gives an in-depth description about the biological side of erotic desire, pushing procreation as the ultimate goal of sexual intimacy between husband and wife, since the body seeks out what with love has maimed the mind. The Roman author encourages men to have multiple partners to scare away love's food, suggesting that there's a very strict difference between pleasurable sex and sex for child production. Lucretius, the all-knowing man, insists that involving love with sex will end only in madness. The short-term goal of procreation created the long-term continuation of class status and familial wealth, all the while keeping purely pleasurable out of the marriage. And these gendered standards between Greco-Roman men and women were egregious, with the women subordinate and controlled by at least one man in her life at all times, from birth to death, such as her father, brother, uncle, any male relative really. And overall, marriages were usually started as non-romantic, as this was not the purpose. It was possible that the two might come to love each other later down the line, but marriage was expected as an act of duty to the family, rather than one founded in affection for their partner. However, the ancient novel itself goes against the grain of normalized ancient marriage by encouraging the love in marriage plotline, which is what I talked about in the last section. Rather, the ancient novel tends to find a loophole for this expectation of class by creating the foundling trope. Usually this relates to elite parents of the lovers exposing them as infants, which is basically like leaving them to die somewhere. This happens a lot. If you can recall Hercules, right? He was like exposed. I mean, he wasn't really exposed by his parents. He was like taken and like left for dead. But you know, it's that idea. And so the lovers will grow up completely unknowing of their actual class status, and usually will assume that they are poor, which is usually the family they're brought into. They're common people with no personal significance. However, the lovers somehow discover that they are indeed noble through their parents, and this will allow them to marry without issue at the end of the story. Plautus, an ancient Roman playwright from the 1st century BC, touches on these issues of status, class, and the foundling trope in his play Cassina, a comedy of errors in which an old married man and his young son both fall for the enslaved Cassina. Despite the entire play being about her and being named after her, Cassina is given not a single line. There's like nearly 1,000 lines of dialogue. So this is a symbolic choice, clearly, to represent her position as enslaved woman with no voice. Lycidamas, the old man, tells Olympio, his enslaved farm manager, to marry Cassina so he can secretly have sex with her later on in the marriage. But Lycidamas cannot marry Cassina himself for several reasons. One being that he has a wife. He's also the head of the household, and he is also a free man. And so we see a lot of these different plays of gender and class in Cassina. Cleostrata, Lycidamas' wife, wants Cassina to marry her son's slave instead, not only so that her son has similar access to Cassina, but so that her husband has no justification to act on his urges. So the play is a back and forth comedy about desire and class to figure out where Cassina will be placed and who will have righteous access to her. At the end of Plautus's play, the narrator reveals in an epilogic fashion that Cassina is actually the daughter of the next door neighbors who are freeborn, thus marking her as a victim of the foundling trope. And so due to this discovery, he can now marry Euthynesus, who is the master's son, instead of his slave. But class boundaries in the ancient novel were one of the major obstacles in order for proper plot reconciliation. I find that the distinction between causes for marriage shows why the obstacles were structured differently in ancient and contemporary romance stories. stories. Cassina fits more into the ideal of an arranged marriage for familial lines rather than an ancient novel that adds in the existence of mutual love, such as Longus's Daphnis and Chloe, in which social status acts as the lover's main boundary to marriage. The novel's narrator describes two beautiful young lovers that are fated to be in love and eventually wed by the god Eros. There's always some kind of divine intervention. Both are exposed after birth and made to suckle from the teat of an animal before they're found by their adoptive parents. And so the two babies are left with noble tokens in their blanket wraps, and the mere existence of these tokens foreshadows the eventual and inevitable recognition of their birth status.
This? Well, I've always had it ever since before I can remember.
May I? Was our secret my Anastasia's and mine? Oh, Anastasia.
Chloe lives with a free family after she is found, and Daphnis is enslaved. And so this ultimately creates a severe difference in class, and this acts as the main boundary. So the two cannot be wed unless they are on equal class status. And they're often separated from each other, only seeing each other naturally in their place of work, to the meadows that they allow their sheep and goats to graze. And when this separation is in place, the two fantasize and imagine each other to better cope with the discomfort. The YouTube channel ContraPoints has talked about fantasy from the audience standpoint, but I want to focus more on the fantasies held by the actual characters of the ancient novel. Longus's novel uses the natural seasons as a plot device, so the two also experience moments of separation as they cannot herd their animals in the winter, and so they only see each other in the summer and spring months when regular to go out to a meadow. And these seasons, although ultimately natural, give way to the cultural ideals as a blocking character. Chloe feels especially hurt by their separation, as she was the first to fantasize about Daphnis and the first to want him, the first to truly desire him. Chloe realized that she found Daphnis to be beautiful during an intimate scene of washing, where she removed all the dirt and grime from him in the nymph's grotto. Here she realizes how beautiful he is.
You're beautiful.
She compliments all of his features in like a monologue, finds herself in this state of like warming. Once it's over, she really just wants to see it again, but she feels helpless in discovering her own feelings. She cries, "I'm ailing these days, but I don't know what my ailment is. I hurt, but I have no wound. I feel sad, but none of my sheep have gone missing. I feel hot, but I'm sitting in deep shade. Daphnis is beautiful, but so are the flowers. His syrinx sounds beautiful, but so do the nightingales, and yet they are nothing special to me." Chloe is in love, and so she fantasizes about physical closeness to Daphnis in the forms of different entities. "I wish I could be his syrinx so he could breathe into me. I wish I could be a goat so I could be in his flock." This is weird, we know, but, it gets the point across. Both Daphnis and Chloe imagine themselves closer to the other through someone or something else, longing to see and hold each other. They're doing the act of substitution to think about what it might be like to be this close to their beloved. Daphnis himself is tormented by this until the two are eventually reunited at a dinner with Chloe's foster parents, Dryas and Nape. They are then separated into different rooms once more when the women, Chloe and Nape, sleep together, while the men, Dryas and Daphnis, sleep together. And while Daphnis sleeps, he cuddles up to Dryas and hugged and kissed him again and again, dreaming that he was doing all this to Chloe. I remember translating this part and being like, oh my god, that's crazy. And then my professor had to explain to me that this kissing was different than our kissing. I don't know. Daphnis uses Dryas as a direct substitution for the non-fulfillment of his actual desires for Chloe, fantasizing that her father, due to his paternal role in Chloe's life and his familial closeness, could actually be Chloe. If we take Maha's approach as yearning being something non-destructive and ultimately not harmful, these dreams and fantasies keep Daphnis and Chloe from committing forms of violence. That here we can contrast the roles that Daphnis and Dorkhan play in Longus's novel. In the novel, Dorkhan is a cowherd that knew about love, both what it does and the words for it, and on that very day had conceived an immediate passion for Chloe. And as the days passed, his heart grew more inflamed. He resolved to make her his by gifts or by force. Dorkhan brings Chloe gifts, which she then gives to Daphnis, and she remains ignorant of Dorkhan's desire for her. And these gifts don't work, and so Dorkhan resorts to bargaining marriage with Dryas, Chloe's adopted father, But this also does not work because a god comes to Dryas and is like, don't accept this, like you'll get more riches one day. And so Dryas rejects him. Dorcon tries to force his desire onto Chloe. He plans to ambush her while wearing a wolfskin in the sacred grotto that the nymphs allowed them, but this plan is ultimately thwarted as dogs find him by catching his scent, and they think he's an actual wolf because he looks like one, so they attack him. Rather than using fantasy to quench his desire, as Daphnis and Chloe had done, he decides to act on these desires, and that leads to his personal downfall and self-destruction. Returning to our friend and spiritual guide Lucretia's work in Book 4, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, he talks at large about dreams and mental imagery. Lucretius writes that counselors then seem to plead their cause and make laws when they dream, generals go to war, and sailors try to battle winds, while with my writing I am occupied. Therefore, he thinks that when someone wants or wanted something the most, they will inevitably dream of that. What men or women fantasize about is what they will see. Both Daphnis and Chloe fantasize and dream about each other as a substitution for a lack of physical closeness, and this is characteristic of yearning. A more modern parallel of this concept that Lucretius describes can be found in fan fiction. Yes, you heard me right, we're going to be talking about fan fiction, particularly self-insert. Enter AO3 and Wattpad. If you don't know what these things are, they are self-publishing websites where people could like write stories and they would put them up, people could read them. And one of the bigger things that existed was fan fiction. During the 2000s and 2010s, celebrity culture ran rampant. One Direction, BTS, 5 Seconds of Summer, every woman everywhere was crushing on these seemingly perfect boy band personas. They were every woman's dream man. They were attractive, famous, rich, and unattainable. Through reading fanfiction and self-insert stories, and I mean like the Y/N your name thing fiasco, young women could better place themselves in these fictional, fantastical scenarios of romance to cope with their lack of power and romance in the real world. This came without the messy, everyday issues of an actual relationship. But these self-insert books would leave spaces for the reader to insert their own information, such as your name, your eye color, your hair color, anything about you, really, like an anthropomorphic mass. So it was fully customizable to the reader. YN was not like other girls. She was very different. But was she really? Of course not. We just really wanted to believe that YN was different because then we would be different. We wanted to believe that there was something special about us that could attract these valuable, highly sought after men. We desired through literature without true reciprocation from the real object of our desires, and this was our substitute. We were projecting our personas of reciprocation through written fantasy. And although we are YN in fanfiction and self-insert stories, we still feel jealousy of our own character. As I said in the previous section, yearning is considered a feminine trait. I say this while taking into consideration the gender norms surrounding both men and women. Men are gendered to be more straightforward, direct, and aggressive in pursuit, letting the women know they're interested. Of course, this isn't always the case, but this has been the traditional expectation for men. Men should court, pursue, and pursue hotly. Meanwhile, women are not expected to pursue hotly, but rather be the pursuit, sit patiently and quietly with their desire being stigmatized. Women are supposed to play hard to get and not act too interested, and this almost intensifies the chase for the man, almost like a predator-prey kind of situation.
I'm the world's most dangerous predator.
While the hot pursuit doesn't leave much room for the women to demonstrate their own interest in the man, a yearning man encourages reciprocation from a woman past the accepted norm.
So the lion fell in love with the lamb.
What a stupid lamb.
You sick, masochistic lion.
The only way the yearning man can be with their beloved is through reciprocation, and this gives a lot of power to the women in this dynamic. A desiring man doesn't care much for reciprocation or for the woman to show interest, but the yearning man does. And the yearning man flips these gender norms completely on their head, and this shows a higher interest and a more feminine attitude towards love rather than the masculine one. This gendered yearning is also shown in Longus's Daphnis and Chloe, as the two lovers don't really understand sexual acts or intimacy of any kind since they grew up in the countryside and worked the fields as a goat herd and shepherd respectively, without any teaching of sex or intimacy. This ignorance of sex is showcased in book 2 of the actual novel, when Philatus describes the violent scene of Pan running after Syrinx, a nymph, in order to her. In response to the story, Daphnis and Chloe imitate Pan and Syrinx. This kind of makes light of a sad story, showing that they don't really understand what that is. Lytis, by the way, is one of their teachers. He explains what Eros is in personal experience with it. And he also exposes the cure, similarly to Ovid relating this feeling to something as an illness. But rather than encouraging reason, he encourages kind of like falling into it with passionate physicality and hugging and kissing and lying naked beside one another. And Daphnis and Chloe do this, but due to their innocence and naivete, they don't really understand what philetus means by lying naked beside one another, because they just do that, and it doesn't really help. They're relying on the knowledge, like it's kind of animalistic, how she-goats and he-goats do the do. This third act of like actual will prove to be a really big obstacle that keeps the two from marrying as well as having until the end of the novel. Daphnis and Chloe use a fantasy as a non-destructive yearning, something that fulfills their desires but doesn't harm in a physical way. This is the only way that the two can fill their desires, as the lovers are entirely clueless on matters of Eros. They don't really have until they get married, and some people think this is a Christian ideal, but truly I think it's just a reflection of gendered values in antiquity of chastity. Daphnis is also the first to desire actual with Chloe. He just doesn't know that it's he wants. In book 3 of the novel, Daphnis realizes his own lack of knowledge in making love after he stood Chloe up and clung to her from behind, imitating the he-goats. But much more frustrated than before, he sat down and started to weep for being more inept than he-goats in making love. Damn. Goat's better than you, babe. But just as Dorcon had pursued Chloe, Daphnis experiences a woman like Kenium who conceived a desire to acquire him as a lover by enticing him with presents. Her attitude was entirely selfish, but we had a whole debate in my class about this of like whether, she actually wanted to help or not. And so Kenium satisfies her desire by using his naivete and lack of know-how, offering a lesson in which he gladly takes her up on. Then at the end of the novel, the two, as in Daphnis and Chloe, are finally able to get married, and so Daphnis does to Chloe what Lycanium had taught him. And for the first time, Chloe learned that what had happened in the woods was nothing but shepherd's games. Another translation of the shepherd's games is child's play. Through Philetus and Lycanium, teaching the two lovers about how to engage in acts as well as mimicry of the he-goats and the she-goats, Daphnis and Chloe find themselves finally able to have and fulfill their desire without needing to cope through past fantasies. In contemporary fictional media, the usual obstacles are quite different, and we see movies with long-distance relationships, love rivals, and forbidden or taboo relationships, or like a terminal illness plot twist. And class boundaries today are rarely the main obstacles, unless you're watching one of those corny, cliche Korean or Chinese dramas where the wealthy mother of the wealthy son slams a sack of money onto the table and ultimately demands the female lead break up with him because she's poor. You should look at Dynamite Kiss, I think. The difference between these class boundaries in ancient and contemporary media have to do directly with the end of the story. Rich men fall in love with and marry poor women and vice versa, and it's actually romanticized as its own kind of trope, which we know as the Cinderella story. Think about Pretty Woman, right? Pretty Woman, she is a prostitute. She tries to get this really rich guy. They date for a second. They get married at the end, and it's just a complete switch of class boundary. It's a Cinderella story, it really is. Despite class boundaries existing in Cinderella, the two lovers still get married without the shocking discovery of one actually having noble parents. Cinderella doesn't turn out to be accidentally of royal status in the end. She's still just like a common person. And in fact, her identity as poor or noble was never of huge significance to her relationship at all. That was not what motivated it. Cinderella's stepsisters and stepmother just didn't like her. And instead, they acted as love rivals that also desire the prince, but who are we kidding? They never had a chance because of the shoe. They preyed on her downfall, and then the rich and the handsome Prince Charming picked her out from hundreds of young women. Cinderella is the first YN. This personally elevated her status, her class status, and her own human value. And one might think that many Disney movies actually hold the same premise. That would be incorrect. Rather than the rich and desirable man, it's often the high-status female main character that picks a man of lower class. And I think this is because of the audience that these movies and novels are ultimately written and produced for. As I searched up Disney movies that had a similar premise as Cinderella with a noble man and common women, I found a surprisingly small amount of them, and that's not at all what I expected. There's like Princess and the Frog and Beauty and the Beast. That's pretty much it. I'm sure there are some that like I just cannot recall. That's what I got. There are also a few movies where the two main lovers are of the same status, such as Snow White, The Little Mermaid, and Mulan. I don't know if Mulan is actually of same status. There might be something with like General and like Town Girl. I'm not entirely knowledgeable on that. In a lot of movies, the woman is the one in the powerful position and the man is just an average guy. To make my point, let me list them. Enchanted, Tangled, Frozen, Aladdin, Anastasia, Pocahontas, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, etc. The amount is like, you could list off a bunch more. And also, let's not forget every single Barbie movie. Every single Barbie movie, the woman is like the princess. The other guy is just like an average Joe. And so these movies are made to appeal to women. Despite them having a side plot of romance, they will mostly center around the woman's struggle. And they focus on the female character overcoming something with the help of her love interest and her friends. In Tangled, Rapunzel travels with Flynn Rider to reunite with her parents before the two lovers get married. Similarly, in Anastasia travels with Dimitri to fake her identity as the princess, but ultimately discovers she was royalty all along. But Dimitri is just a guy who worked in the palace when she was little. Both Flynn and Dimitri are really just average guys and commoners, while the women are powerful royal figures within the foundling trope. And this move towards the powerful women character in contemporary media contributes to feminist movements and social changes that encourage women to have more control and more power over their own lives. And so this trope translates at a global scale. On social media, particularly TikTok, the internet has dubbed this powerful female character a girl boss. This girl boss character is a woman who is empowering, inspiring, independent. She does not need a man to be happy and successful, because she can take care of herself and she gets what she wants. She moves on, she gets what she wants. And so within these fictional worlds, the main women have enviable power over the men in their lives and are not subject to brutal expectations or the patriarchal reality that women deal with in the 21st century. Also, I don't even want to say just the 21st century. Let's go back many, many centuries. The girl boss character is loved. She doesn't even need to try. Like, Rapunzel and Anastasia are entirely themselves throughout the movie, and the male leads fall head over heels for them anyway. Contrasting against the traditional women characters being chosen by the men are the ones who have been chosen by the powerful heroines that exhibit high value characteristics surrounding their nobility and connections. This creates an inherent desire for these characters to be chosen by someone more valuable than themselves to better elevate their own value. There is no contemporary movie where this value is highlighted, such as Materialists, a 2025 rom-com drama that raises the question about what it means to equate a material good such as money to one's personal lovability and romantic compatibility. The movie was an easy watch, but one scene in particular caught my attention. It was a scene between Harry, played by Pedro Pascal, and Lucy, played by Dakota Johnson. They were in an expensive, professionally designed penthouse that sat far above the clouds, and they shared a really deep, vulnerable moment in the kitchen after having. So the two are having a heart-to-heart about the relationship and the struggles Lucy had been facing with her own personal value. She admits that Harry makes her feel valuable.
Because you make me feel valuable.
And it was previously agreed on by both Lucy and her coworkers at a matchmaking company that Harry is a unicorn who seemingly has no flaws. Harry is a high-value man on the dating market. He has a lot of money. He's really good looking. He's Pedro Pascal. He's a really good personality. He's Pedro Pascal. He's kind. He's Pedro Pascal. He treats the women that he likes with respect. He treats every woman with respect. He is charismatic. And the phrase high-value man might be familiar to you if you've been victim to the manosphere, an online echo chamber of misogyny that aims to push women into traditional gender roles of subservience. The term itself implies a ranking, that if there is a high-value man, there must be a low-value man, and that is the complete opposite. They're poor, ugly, and mean. This ranking places individuals on a tier list of value, where we rank people based on their admired qualities and those frowned upon. The first example that comes to mind comes from a TikTok trend where people would begin their sentence with, he or she is a 10, but, and then fill in the blank with a flaw or a possible deal breaker.
He's a 3, but he comes from old money.
4.
Okay. She's like an 8.5, but she's in a sorority at ASU.
Then that person would be ranked on a scale of 1 to 10. Because Harry is a high-value man, there is no but to his personality. He is at the top of the tier list, giving him probable cause to date like literally any woman that he wants that is below or on the same level as him. But he chose Lucy, a young woman with no wealthy connections or family. We see why yet again. Lucy's job of being a matchmaker had her categorizing people into those who she personally believed and assumed would have the same general value based on their careers and physical attributes instead of personal compatibility. They're very surface level criteria. She recognizes that it feels impossible for Harry, the seemingly perfect man with a bunch of money and power, to be at all romantically interested in her. And at the end of the movie, Lucy decides that she doesn't really want to marry Harry, instead ending up with a lower class man named John Pitts, who is played by Chris Evans. Not as good as Pedro Pascal, but I will give him the benefit of the doubt because nobody is good as Pedro Pascal. She picks John Pitts, a lower class man, over the less emotionally invested, arranged relationship that she had with Harry. Removed from the world Harry partook in, John lived in a rundown apartment with several other roommates and did very odd jobs to pay the bills. John is a clear step down for Lucy in terms of the material value that she felt with Harry, and that's all that she cared about for a while, but she realized that love was more important. The overall resolution of Materialists is that Lucy realizes she would regret choosing only money and status over love and passion that she felt for John. And for the modern audience, this might seem like an ideal conclusion for this movie. Lucy ultimately choosing love to be her authentic self rather than the materialistic facade she had put on for Harry. In fact, this is the usual conclusion for romantic movies in general. These romances fall into a socially acceptable script of their time periods. The rigidity of class boundaries is not present at all in Materialists. In fact, it completely breaks that. Instead, the obstacle serves as a gate to Lucy's fantasy. We follow Lucy's fantasy throughout the entire movie with an ideal husband, a rich man that makes well over 6 figures that can take care of her. As the audience watches the film, we are there with her, and it doesn't help that Harry is played by Pedro Pascal. He's Pedro Pascal. He's not only Lucy's ideal man, he's our ideal man. So we live vicariously through her when she switches up and decides she wants her financially struggling ex. We are supposed to be on her side and feel the same. The audience is supposed to think that, of course, Lucy is choosing the authentic love and connection she feels for John, ripping herself from that fantasy with Harry. When Lucy chose John over Harry, I was immensely disappointed. My professor was like, "Do you think it's just because it was Pedro Pascal?" And I was like, "I don't know, maybe."
You know it. I came here to save you.
I fear this does demonstrate a fault in casting. If Chris Evans was cast as Harry and Pedro Pascal as John, I would have been all for Lucy choosing John. The casting choices made the movie's endgame a lot less believable, and this does undermine the moral of marriage without love as the ideal. For Lucy's choice of John, I chastise her. The lovers bring out a side of each other that they had not been able to reach on their own. Lucy was focused purely on her materialistic desires, which is why she and John broke up in the first place. John couldn't provide the life she wanted. She wanted to eat out at a very nice diner, and he was suggesting another hot dog stand, and she just couldn't have it.
I wish that I didn't care if we ate from a halal cart on our 5-year anniversary, but I do.
Harry could, but John was her endgame, because of course he was. John was Lucy's other half, her destined lover, and despite being separated, they inevitably were led back to each other by some mystical force in the universe. This seems like the perfect ending for this video essay, right? Wrong. The idea that love wins over everything else or whatever, that's wrong. You're wrong. In reality, true love has just replaced the economic purposes of ancient marriage. But I don't think love and economic gain are the only possible causes for marriage. I think there is something else entirely that should be considered. So hear me out for just a little bit longer. Let's move on. In Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes rambles about the separation of human beings from their other half. He describes their original form as something very grotesque. He writes, "The form of each human being as a whole was round, with back and sides forming a circle. But it had 4 arms and an equal number of legs, and 2 faces exactly alike on a cylindrical neck. There was a single head for both faces, which faced in opposite directions, and one can imagine all the rest from this. And then Aristophanes ruminates on their separation as a punishment for their planned betrayal to storm heaven and take it from the gods. And then he details the aftermath of this separation. Now, when their nature was divided in two, each half in longing rushed to the other half of itself, and they threw their arms around each other and intertwined them, desiring to grow together into one, dying of hunger and inactivity too, because they were unwilling to do anything apart from one another. When their other halves died, the widowed men or women would seek out another half and ultimately perish for it. Aristophanes too believed in the power of true and pure love.
This is true love.
Having only one fated partner that we will forever end up searching for because we were separated and we were no longer born stitched together. Once again, the lover wishes to have their beloved right where they can love them. This does beg a few questions. Is it safe to say that one does not yearn for love, but for the whole authentic self that comes from that? Is all sexual desire, yearning, and love just the mind searching for a part of itself that may be missing? Was Aristophanes right about the idea of the other half having been separated, and we yearn and long for them always to complete us? Is the longing for love just an excuse to learn more about ourselves as we continue to change and evolve? In the summer of 2024, ContraPoints published a video essay that changed my perspective on the Twilight series, talking about the intricacies and the intellectual genius of the relationships and underlying pop philosophical concepts that could be explored through the medium. With this section, I follow in her well-established footsteps. So, to every single one of these questions that I just raised a few seconds ago, go back if you forgot, I raised Twilight to the stand, an early book series from the 2000s where vampires, werewolves, and humans mingle and mix. Most of this section will be focused on content from the books. I have not finished all of the books, but I finished enough. The occasional movie scene will also be used. I've read the first and the second book. I'm now reading Midnight Sun. I needed a break, and I do like books where they're from the man's perspective. I think that's a really good creative choice, and Stephenie Meyer, you've done it again. The overall summary of the book series surrounds the romantic journey between the human Bella Swan and the vampire Edward Cullen. This supernatural status is the main obstacle keeping the two from fully joining together for a majority of the series, determining that Edward must either become human or Bella become vampire. From the very beginning, we do know that Bella will eventually become a vampire. She is finally turned into a vampire when she is bleeding out on their homemade birth table. By the end of the story, Edward and Bella have a daughter with an interesting name, Renesmee, living as a happy family with Jacob, who made his wolfie claim on their daughter.
I'm Jacob, and already you think that you have some moronic wolfie claim on her?
I knew that there was something deeper to the series, something that Stephenie Meyer was waiting for someone to notice, and trust I noticed. Bella's odd obsession with vampirism. Well, it's very obvious, actually. I'm sure everybody noticed this. The movies do not portray her desperation for this supernatural status even half as well as they are conveyed in the actual books. And so I decided to explore this even further to the most possible extreme. Is it possible that Bella did not love the personality that is Edward, but rather the dangerous predator that he represents and plays? And I don't mean to focus on the bad boy, bodice ripper, deviant that Edward is ultimately symbolic of, rather him being a creature of transformation, a vampire whose venom can make his victims into bloodsuckers. When Bella and Edward first locked eyes, they both felt this magnetic tug, like an invisible hand guiding them to always look at each other, a psionic force that cursed them to never stray from the other's mind. The two are then inseparable, and you can't get Bella without Edward, joined at the hip and hands held as if they would perish when these non-existent stitches are removed. Sounds like Aristophanes to me. Bella becomes happier, growing closer to Edward's family and acclimates to his way of life. She is transformed just by being near him, and when she's bit by James, a carnivorous vampire with red eyes instead of the kind gold she had grown accustomed to, a fatal yet transformative venom flows through her veins, and Edward is left at a fork in the road of, does he allow her to change into one of them, or save her human life. Edward never really wanted Bella to be like him, chasing her human-like warmth like a dragon treasures gold. And the two lovers are searching for something profane and sacred through their relationship, experiencing the other's world through closeness. And Bella is hung up on vampirism, just as Edward is hung up on humanism. I'm not saying that Bella does not love Edward. I'm not saying that. Her love is appealing, like an adrenaline rush. Stephenie Meyer has several scenes in New Moon where Bella hears Edward in her head when doing something risky or reckless, and this pushes her to make more dangerous decisions because she wants to hear his velvet voice, as she describes this in the books, as often as possible. In the books, though, like, there is no, like, misty form. It really is just, like, Bella imagining him in her head. Edward is not the safe choice, rather the opposite, and this is important. As I said, he is a dangerous predator.
I'm the world's most dangerous predator.
Bella is addicted to the rush that he provides because being loved by an abject hunter is new and exciting. And the other men who are interested in her, such as Tyler, Ben, and Mike. Tyler is barely mentioned in the movies, but it's the guy who nearly runs her over with the truck. All of these guys are just normal guys, and they don't carry the same retrospective danger or ability to transform her, and so Bella does not even give them the time of day. We know that Bella is destined to eventually transform, not only because she has to be with Edward, but because in the first book, she is already established to have all of the classic vampire characteristics. She has pale skin, dark clothes, sensitivity to blood, and a deep connection to the supernatural world. But oddly enough, Catherine Hardwicke, the movie's director, does make a decision to leave out the really important detail that Bella Swan can actually smell blood. She gets queasy around blood. She's sensitive to blood. During the biology lab where class was testing for their blood types, Bella nearly faints and is taken to the nurse, where Edward asks about the situation. The conversation goes as such. "I smelled the blood," I said, wrinkling my nose. "People can't smell blood," he contradicted. "Well, I can. That's what makes me sick. It smells like rust and salt." The only thing that Bella is lacking is venom, Edward's venom, in her veins, so she has to get to know the dangerous predator that will eventually initiate the transformative bite. Bella also grapples with her aging on her birthday, acting like a really cruel to anyone who even thinks about wishing her one. After an incident with Jasper nearly eating Bella, Edward is confronted once more about how harmful his vampirism is to Bella's life, which he thought that he could ignore through the power of love, but decided that he couldn't. Of course, he leaves and goes to Rio for a vacation, and Bella is left broken, alone, and mopey. Charlie notices that something is really off, and he says that moping is the wrong word, and that moping would actually be better, because that would be doing something. He says that she's just lifeless. And the reason for this is because she lost the connection that brought her closer to Aristophanes' other half, the vampiric soul living within her that has yet to be awakened by venom. Bella mourns her supernatural future. She says, "That future was lost to me forever, had never really been within my grasp," while projecting this loss onto Jacob Black, her wolfy friend with benefits. Romance stories are not realistic. In fact, the romance genre ties the real, authentic self to the individual in love. But in reality, most people would agree that your true self is who you are when you're alone, without the need to put on a performance for other people. This is why I think that Bella's wants and desires are entirely selfish. She acknowledges that she doesn't like who she is when she isn't with Edward, noting that it was depressing to realize that she wasn't the heroine anymore, that her story was over. And then Bella feels like the heroine again through Jacob's presence, and he makes her feel fulfilled. She says, "I waited for the memory to hit, to open the gaping hole, but as it so often did, Jacob's presence kept me whole." The connection to Aristophanes and his other half is damning here. Through love, Bella feels more like herself than she does while alone. To add to her self-serving behavior, once Bella realizes that she had seriously befriended another not-human through Jacob and his wolfy friends, she doesn't think about anybody else, only herself. She thinks, but Jacob? Jacob, who was just Jacob and nothing more than that? Jacob, my friend? Jacob, the only human I'd ever been able to relate to? And he wasn't even human. I felt the urge to scream again. What did this say about me? Bella acts like she's frustrated with these choices, but she is not. Bella subconsciously searches for another hunter to replace Edward's spot in his absence, landing on wolf boy Jacob Black. Through Jacob, as kind of like a portal or a medium, she gains access to his pack with the other wolves and also Emily, Sam Uli's fated mate. Bella learns more about herself through these supernatural families and love interests, and this makes her unlike any other female book character in love. Bella is the the opposite of the girl boss archetype. While human, she struggles to find her authentic self. She feels this deep-seated desire to become a vampire in order to protect Jacob from Sam. Meyer writes, "I wanted to take a swing at him. No, I wanted to do more than that. More than anything, I wanted to be fierce and deadly. Someone no one would dare mess with. Someone who would scare Sam Uli silly. I wanted to be a vampire." Bella herself is shocked at this violent desire that she recognizes in herself. This damning subconscious thought contributes to the overwhelming amount of evidence that Bella ultimately considers the romantic arrangement transactional. She stays with Edward, the vampire who can transform her, and satisfies his curiosity as a human, while she gets closer to the ultimate goal of vampirism. Similarly, Lucy, a materialist, longs for a gross amount of wealth, meaning to use Harry to achieve this goal, while Harry wants the practicality of marriage without the need for emotional connection. As in both Twilight and Materialist, the two lovers represent different statuses that each yearn for, meant to be satisfied through a conditional marriage. This also allows for a grandiose switch in gender dynamics. Allow me to explain. Lucas Papadimitriopoulos writes about the difference between pure love conditioned by Sophrosune and illicit desire in Heliodorus' Aethiopica, and it's centered around Theogenes, a Thessalian hero, and Chariclea, a priestess of Artemis. I've already explained this once, but just in case you forgot, because it's been a second. The narrator explains that the two are madly in love and wish to be wed and have sex, but are held back by Chariclea's oath to chastity and cannot couple until they're married. This theme of chastity goes hand in hand with Sophrosune, self-control, which is one of the most central themes in the Aethiopica. Rachel Bird argues in her 2020 monograph about Sophrosune that Theogenes had not shown the same self-control that Chariclea had, and it was only held back from by Chariclea's personal will. She also writes that misogyny is cast out by desire, whereas his previous stance did not necessitate the possession of Sophrosune. Now he will be tested in this respect. The narrator's personal characterization of Theogenes could very well be false, but he is the only source we have to go on for Theogenes' thoughts and reasons behind his behavior. Within the novel, Theogenes had sworn up and down that he had never even thought of touching another woman before, but after meeting Chariclea, his mind was suddenly changed, and he was lit aflame with the fire of Eros. Suddenly, this love is hurting him, and he lacks a proper outlet to release these frustrations, as the frustration is not mutual between the two. I recently found out that Stephenie Meyer wrote another novel called Life and Death, which was basically just a gender-swapped version of Twilight, but the original was already gender-swapped. Theogenes is the masculine force in Heliodorus' novel, but in Twilight, Edward does not take on the masculine role in desire that Theogenes does. Rather, Bella takes on that role as a woman inflamed by Eros. She had never felt such desire for physical intimacy until she met Edward. She is willing to run headfirst into this relationship, despite Edward's desire to stay cautious and wait until after marriage. Although Edward also feels the desire that Bella does, he takes on the role of the chaste Chariclea by acting as a mediator. He controls the speed of their quickly developing relationship through metaphorical markers, such as physical intimacy and his conditional marriage with Bella. Bella is very frustrated by these decisions, but ultimately allows it to happen because it's what he wants. Edward has drawn many careful lines for our physical relationship, with the intent to keep me alive. Though I respected the need for maintaining a safe distance between my skin and his razor-sharp, venom-coated teeth, I tended to forget about trivial things like that when he was kissing me. Only after they marry do the two lovers finally have their sacred union. It happens on an island in the movie. They're swimming in the water, and then they're doing the do, and then she wakes up, boom, pregnant. And the lady is like, oh my god, you have the devil inside of you. But these romance stories encourage good behavior on not only the lover's part, but also the existing foils that tell us more about the lover's relationship. They assist in bringing lovers together, allowing them to show off their loyalty to each other and their personal self-control. Jacob Black is essentially a literary test for Bella to show her undying love for and loyalty to Edward Cullen. Similarly to Edward, Jacob only likes Bella and had never felt such erotic heat for another person until this abnormally normal woman came along. Meanwhile, Edward has no such character that lets him show his undying loyalty to Bella, as no women really approach him as potential love rivals. Some people might think that like Jessica might have been one, maybe the woman in the restaurant, but like he barely even glance to them. Jacob, Bella does glance at. We do see that. In online communities today, particularly in women's spaces, it's often encouraged for women to learn who they are and become the best version of themselves alone, without interference from the outside or from a romantic interest. However, in romance stories, it's the lover who makes the woman whole and truly fills that void that she didn't know she even had in the first place until he showed her. After Edward leaves, Bella constantly describes herself as a woman with something missing, feeling like she was only half of herself. Jacob, she explains, helps alleviate this pain, but just as desire and pursuit is gendered, so is authenticity. Women are still expected to experience their existence, romantic scenarios, through that of their future or current love interest, and we see this in everyday questions and behaviors, ones that are so simple and might not be carrying obvious undertones. The man is always present in our questions about ourselves and our presentation, even if just lightly implied. It's invisible, but it's there. Luckily, there are plenty of feminine spaces today that have made this comparison more obvious and often discourage it, letting us reassure our fellow women that no, you should not care about what Jacob thinks. But women wanting to receive male validation has often been, and will most likely continue to be, a challenge of self-realization and social awareness. Although there have been attempts to combat this socialized behavior, it is still largely prevalent today. However, women cope in feminist online spaces, frequently talking about how differently they would dress, act, and exist in the world if men didn't walk the planet. This was also an ancient attitude expected of women, want to please the men in order to appear valuable. In Euripides' Medea is scorned by Jason choosing a young princess over herself, but his wrongdoing is ultimately overshadowed by her extreme retaliation. But she's not heartless. She lacks resolve in her children, hesitating to do what she believes she must. They must die at all events, and since they must, I who gave them birth shall kill them. Come, put on your armor, my heart. Why do I put off doing the terrible deed that must be done? But Jason is still the heroic figure in the end. When he comes searching for Medea, he lacks care for her and her well-being. But it is not so much about her that I am concerned as about the children. She will be punished by those she has wronged, but I have come to save the lives of my children, that no harm may come to them from the next of kin, avenging on them their mother's impious crime. Impious. There's a religion. My God. Jason claims to have been merciful in marrying Medea over other Greek women. No Greek woman would have dared to do this, yet I married you in preference to them, and a hateful and destructive match it has proved. You are a she-lion, not a woman, with a nature more savage than Scylla, the Tuscan monster. I don't know if it's Scylla or if the sea is silent. If the sea is silent, it's Scylla. The word that Jason uses here, physin in the Greek, directly translates to nature. So okay, hang on. You're a she-lion, not a woman, with a nature more savage than Scylla, the Tuscan monster. So physin directly translates to nature, so it's like human nature. Euripides writes here that Jason believes our authentic self is linked to our nature, who we were from birth. Does this mean that Medea had been hiding this part of herself from Jason their whole marriage? Does this suggest then that this explosion and the murder of her children was inevitable in the long run? Was this always fated? And if that's the case, does that mean that Jason's scumbag behavior was also hidden from Medea? All of these complicated questions, can we really say if there even exists an authentic self? And can this only come from the most dire of situations? Well, no. Medea is just a direct contradiction of the idea of the authentic self found through true love. Not because her true self is like ugly or anything, but because she finds her other half from losing her relationship rather than participating in it. It's ultimately appealing to think that there's someone we are meant to be and that we will inevitably and eventually become that person. But our authentic self is a romantic trope that comes from finding your other half. You meet someone who makes you feel safe and loved enough to let down your guard and be the best version of yourself. You must both be and become yourself before and through love. But with Medea, we see who she truly is after the removal of Jason from the equation. David Constant argues that the massive sound play involving the name Medea in the opening verses of Euripides' tragedy may signal a special status for the heroine, perhaps even divinity. For a quick lesson in ancient Greek, Medea in Greek is written as Medea, which, Constant explains, is significant as the pronunciation creates a subliminal phonemic background for the name and therefore help to give it an eerie prominence. This, paired with the final image of Medea soaring into the sky on a serpent chariot in Euripides' poem, really paints her as a vengeful goddess, released from the confines of her cruel marriage rather than a woman restrained by torturous love. So Medea found her real life by losing love, but what about people who don't find love? Or better yet, cannot or don't feel it? This is yet another contradiction to what people consider the true self. According to the logic of the romance genre, if someone doesn't feel romantic attraction, they shouldn't ever be completely whole. To this I raise Hippolytus, a play by the Greek tragedian Euripides. Again. I'm gonna take off my glasses for a second, my eyes hurt. The main character, Hippolytus, scorns love, and as for marriage, well, none of it. We'll have none of it. I don't know if there's meant to be a have there. I will double check that. Remaining entirely uninterested and unfeeling in anything to do with romance. The prologue of the poem is told from Cyprus, or Aphrodite's, perspective. She's the goddess of love. And she enthusiastically talks of Hippolytus's origins and faith. He was born from Theseus and an Amazon, who also worshipped Artemis, the virgin goddess. In relation to contemporary asexuality, his birth from an Amazonian woman already hints at his aversion to sex, as the Amazons are famous for abstaining from sex with men. Think about like that one time when that one guy, I don't know his name, saw like an Amazonian woman or one of the worshippers of Artemis naked, and she turned him into a stag. Nowhere in the poem does Hippolytus monologue about a traumatizing experience he had which kept him from, rather only speaking about his pride for never having been attracted to or felt desire to sleep with even the most beautiful woman. Theseus married Phaedra, who fell in love with Hippolytus and wished to bed him, but Hippolytus confirmed that he didn't feel the same at all when confronted, and he even shamed Phaedra for daring to feel these things for him. After Hippolytus confronts Phaedra about her feelings, Phaedra leaves a note before unaliving herself. When Theseus, Hippolytus' father, finds the note that Phaedra left, he accuses him of pursuing Phaedra, but Hippolytus immediately claps back with a prideful declaration of his chastity. Upon this sunlit earth there is no man, deny it though you may, more chaste than I. By one thing I am untouched, the very thing in which you think you have convicted me. To this very moment my body is untainted by. I do not know this act save by report or seeing it in a painting. I am not eager to look at it either, since I have a virgin soul. Hippolytus is quite sure in his identity as a follower of Artemis and her teachings, but his wording also suggests a complete disinterest in. He has not sought it out or even looked at anything having to do with intimacy. In fact, he sounds disgusted at the mere thought of it. Oh Zeus, why? Yeah, this is a really fun passage. I really like this one. O Zeus, why have you settled women this bane to cheat mankind in the light of the sun? If you wish to propagate the human race, it was not for women that you should have provided this. Rather, men should have put down in the temples either bronze or iron or a mass of gold and buy offspring, each for a price appropriate to his means, and then dwell in houses free from the female sex. So basically, rather than have Hippolytus asks Zeus to make it so men can simply ask for a child from the gods. We also know that he is not an incel, a man who blames his celibacy on women. Therefore, I believe it's safe to say that Hippolytus is one of the first examples of asexuality in ancient literature. So it's not woke. It's been around for a really long time, since ancient times, in fact. But he is killed at the end of the play, falling back to the inevitable fate of the characters who keep the couple from coupling together. Hippolytus is his own obstacle to love, and for that, he is divinely punished after his father calls down curses upon him. His own chariot destroyed him, and the curses of your mouth, which you uttered against your son to your father, Lord of the sea. Hippolytus is an astute example of an asexual man lacking in desire, and one might argue that Chariclea of the Aethiopica is also. However, Chariclea's case is entirely different. While yes, both Chariclea and Hippolytus follow Artemis and insist on chastity because of it, Chariclea's is very conditional, while Hippolytus is absolute. When I say conditional for Chariclea, I mean that there is an exception, and that the exception is her true love and marriage. Although the two can not have or go past kissing and sweet caresses until marriage, Chariclea does not have a virgin soul like Hippolytus. Hippolytus does not consider his cherished chastity, I can't say this word, cherished chastity and divine devotion to be an obstacle, but Chariclea does. In fact, her religious oath is the biggest obstacle between having intimate relations with Theogenes. As Hippolytus does not feel desire in general, he does not and cannot yearn, and because of this he will never experience his authentic self from a romantic relationship. Both Medea and Hippolytus are plain contradictions of what the romance genre wants its audience to believe. Neither need another person to make them whole, and so the fantasy that the ancient novel offers, the one of mutual devotion, cracks. Do we really need a conclusion? If you've listened to me talk for like the last 2 hours, then you would know all of my main points. You would know all of the things that I've discussed in every single individual section. But I will reiterate everything for you, dear listener, just in case this was the part that you skipped to. I know some people immediately skip to the conclusion if they don't want to watch the whole thing, just because the conclusion does summarize, so I guess it does hold some purpose. But you know what? Fine. Throughout this essay, I have incorporated many different sources from the Greco-Roman world and found modern equivalents that hold personal value to me, that also show my personality as the author of the script and also the person filming this video essay. I think that having passion to put into your work is very important, and I think that making that passion available for people to understand is just as important. With all of these comparisons in mind, we've seen how these work, both ancient and modern, structure love, desire, and yearning differently. The main distinction between desire and love relies on the reciprocation of the lover's gaze. For example, when we look back at the Aethiopica, we see that Theogenes and Chariclea had a moment where they locked eyes. That was a reciprocal motion for them. We look at Twilight, they also had that moment where they locked eyes, and that was also reciprocal. And in the case of reciprocation, safe love is able to blossom. And then once all of the obstacles are cleared, so does marriage in the love and marriage plotline that John J. Winkler describes in his 1994 invention of romance. When the gaze is unreciprocated, dangerous love emerges, creating harm in pursuit of one's subject of desire. We see this example in Cleitophon and Leucippe, in which Cleitophon looks at Leucippe and the gaze is not reciprocated, and so it feels very predatory. If desire is returned and physical separation persists, the lovers must find ways to creatively deal with the lack of closeness, and this can occur through several different things. One could be substitution, such as Daphnis using Dorcon as a substitution for Chloe through his parental closeness, and also as mimicry, also in Daphnis and Chloe, not only using the she-goats and he-goats as examples of what to possibly do in the case of intimacy, but also receiving lessons from Philotas and Lycaonion, the wolf woman. If the desire is not returned and an attempt is made to force said desire, the one who does the harm faces the consequences, whether from severe injury or death, such as Dorcon and Phaedra. Dorcon tries to force himself on Chloe, is wounded severely by dogs, and then killed by pirates eventually. Phaedra confesses her undying love to Hippolytus, the literal son of her husband, also perishes. When love no longer has any obstacles and the two lovers can finally consummate their marriage, the question of what is gained remains. We look to Aristophanes and Plato's Symposium to talk about this, when Aristophanes claims that lovers will inevitably search for their other half to fill a void which emerged from heavenly punishment. And through Twilight, Edward finds Bella's inner goodness and human-like qualities appealing, as they greatly differ from his self-perceived villainous persona. For Bella, she finds Edward's vampirism entrancing and yearns for him to eventually bite her as well for like the whole saga up until she is bit. However, once Bella is turned in Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2, the two remain together despite having gained or lost what they sought for originally. So Medea becomes her authentic self through separation rather than coupling. Once she leaves Jason, unalives her children, she fully relinquishes herself into her divine form that David Constant talks about in Medea as divine. And Hippolytus had no other half because he was asexual. He was born that way. He had no desire for anybody. The fantastical concept of mutual devotion that the ancient novel attempts to offer is completely overruled through the exceptions in ancient literature. So-called frivolous, lightweight, and cheesy stories can tell us a lot about the ancient audience and what they might have found appealing or important in their ancient novels and also in their general life, and also what authors meant when identifying different stages of romance. We can learn much about where our personal cliche plot lines today might have come from simply by analyzing and discussing ancient themes in the written word. However, we've also learned that Stephenie Meyer plagiarized Daphnis and Chloe to create Twilight. I have never seen two works that are more similar. But this is alleged and also the end of the video essay.